First story of the day. The apartment was quiet when I moved in. Too quiet. That should have been my first clue. The landlord, Mr. Hargrove, seemed eager to rent it out. A little too eager. He barely showed me around. Just handed me the keys with a strange look in his eyes, like he wanted me to take them fast and leave him behind. I figured it was nothing. I needed a place, and the rent was cheap. The apartment itself was small but decent. A second-floor unit with old wooden floors and a single window that overlooked the alley. There was something odd about it, though. I kept feeling like I wasn't alone even when I was. Like someone was always standing just out of sight. A week after I moved in, a woman knocked on my door. She was in her 50s, wearing a heavy coat, even though it wasn't cold. She looked over my shoulder like she was expecting to see someone else. "You moved in," she said. It wasn't a question, more like a statement. I nodded. "Yeah, just last week." She stared at me for a long moment before shaking her head. "You shouldn't be here. You should leave before it notices you." I asked her what she meant, but she walked away without another word. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard something. Breathing. Soft, uneven, coming from the corner of my room. I turned on every light, checked the closet, under the bed, even the cabinets, nothing. The next day I asked Hargrove about the last tenant. He went pale. "She's gone," he said quietly. "Vanished? Left everything behind. Didn't even lock the door." I pressed him for more. Finally, he told me. Her name was Marissa, and she had lived there for 3 months before she disappeared. No one saw her leave. She was just gone. The police found no signs of a struggle. The front door was still locked from the inside. Her phone, wallet, and shoes were all still there. I should have left then, but I didn't. That night, I dreamed about her. She stood in the hallway, staring at me. Her eyes were hollow, and her mouth opened as if she wanted to scream. But no sound came out. I woke up to the sound of knocking. Not at the front door, but inside the apartment. I followed it, heart pounding, until I reached the closet. The knocking stopped. When I opened the door, it was empty, but something cold rushed past me, like a sudden wind inside a place where there should be none. My skin crawled. Over the next few nights, things got worse. My reflection in the window didn't move when I did. I'd hear footsteps in the hallway at 3 a.m., but when I looked, no one was there. And always the faint sound of breathing in the dark. One night I found something on the wall. Scratches. Deep gouges, as if someone had dragged their nails across the plaster. I ran my fingers over them and felt something wet. When I turned, on the light my fingers were red. I tried to leave. Packed a bag and headed for the door. But it wouldn't open. No matter how hard I turned the lock, the door wouldn't budge. The window was stuck too, sealed shut like it had never been opened. Then, I heard it. The breathing. Right behind me. I turned and there she was. Marissa, or what was left of her. She was pale and thin, her eyes sunken, her skin stretched tight over her bones. She raised one hand and pointed at the closet. I didn't want to look, but I did. Inside, I found something buried beneath the floorboards, a box. Inside the box was a journal, Marissa's journal. The last entry was written in shaky handwriting. "It watches me from the corner. It wants me to disappear like the others. I can't sleep. If I sleep, I'll be gone too." I heard the door unlock behind me. Slowly, I turned and left the apartment. I didn't take anything with me. Not the bag, not the journal. Nothing. I never went back. Later, I heard from Hargrove that someone else had moved in. A young guy, just like me. He stayed 2 weeks. Then he vanished, and the next person after him, and the next. Now, the apartment sits empty again. But late at night, if you walk past the building and listen carefully, you can hear it. Breathing in the dark, waiting for the next tenant. Second story of the day. The motel wasn't my first choice, but it was the only one with a vacancy that night. I'd been driving for hours, too exhausted to care about the peeling paint on the sign or the flickering neon that buzzed above the entrance. All I needed was a bed. Nothing more. The man behind the front desk barely looked up from his newspaper when I walked in. His face was pale and drawn, his eyes dark and hollow. He slid a key across the counter without a word. "Room 206, he said. Then, after a pause, he added, "Keep the door locked." I laughed, thinking it was a joke, but he didn't smile. The room was upstairs at the end of the hall. The carpet was stained and worn thin, and every door I passed had peeling numbers and dents in the wood like someone had tried to claw their way out. When I reached 206, I hesitated. The door looked worse than the rest, splintered around the handle, like it had been forced open more than once. Inside, the air was cold, colder than it should have been in the middle of summer. The room itself was unremarkable, faded curtains, an old bedspread, a cracked mirror over the sink. But there was something off. A feeling I couldn't shake, like someone was watching me. I locked the door behind me, just like the desk clerk said, and tried to ignore the sense of unease creeping under my skin. I took a quick shower, left the TV on for background noise, and lay down. At first, I thought it was the wind, a faint whispering sound outside the window. But when I glanced at the curtains, I saw they weren't moving. No breeze. The whispering got louder, turning into a soft murmur like someone speaking just beyond the door. I got up and checked the hallway. Empty. When I closed the door again, I noticed something strange. The deadbolt was unlocked. I was sure I had locked it earlier. I turned it back, double-checked it, and went back to bed. At 2:06 a.m., something woke me. Knocking. 3 sharp raps on the door. I sat up, heart hammering in my chest. "Who is it?" I called, but no one answered. I stood, walked slowly to the peephole and looked out. Nothing. Just the dark hallway. When I turned around, I froze. There was someone sitting on the edge of the bed, a woman, pale, wearing an old-fashioned dress, her back to me. Her head was bowed, long dark hair hanging over her shoulders. She was whispering something I couldn't understand. A soft, repetitive chant. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Slowly, she turned her head to look at me. Her face was wrong. Hollow eyes, black where there should have been white. Her mouth stretched too wide, teeth yellow and sharp. She smiled. Then she vanished. The bed was empty again. But the whispering didn't stop. It was everywhere now, filling the room. The walls, the floor, even the air itself seemed to hum with it. I grabbed my bag and bolted for the door. The handle wouldn't turn. The deadbolt spun in circles, loose and useless. The window was stuck. I slammed my fists against the glass, but it wouldn't break. Behind me, the whispering grew louder, closer. I turned and saw her again, standing in front of the mirror. Only now, she wasn't alone. There were others. Dozens of pale faces staring at me from the glass, mouths moving in silent screams. I backed into the corner, heart racing, trying not to blink, not to move. But then the lights flickered, and when they came back on, she was inches from my face. Her breath was ice. She whispered, "Room 206. I blacked out. When I woke up, it was morning. The door was open. My bag was on the bed. Everything was normal. I ran. At the front desk, there was a new clerk, a young woman who looked confused when I asked about the man from the night before. "There's no one like that working here," she said. "There hasn't been for years." I asked about room 206. Her face went pale. "That room's been empty since the incident." "What incident?" I asked. She lowered her voice. "A woman died there. Years ago. She checked in, but she never checked out. They found her sitting on the bed, staring at the mirror. She'd clawed her own eyes out." I left without another word. But sometimes, late at night when I'm alone, I hear it again, knocking, 3 times, and the whisper, "Room 206. The first time I saw her was late in the evening, just as the sun was slipping behind the trees. The lake was still, like glass, and everything around it was quiet. Too quiet. I had gone there to clear my head, to think. But as I stood on the shore, watching the water ripple in the breeze, I heard it, crying. Soft at first, like someone stifling sobs. I thought maybe it was another hiker. Maybe someone was hurt or lost. So I followed the sound. That's when I saw her. She was kneeling, at the water's edge, her back to me. Long black hair hanging down, tangled and dripping. Her shoulders shook with each quiet sob. She wore a long white dress, stained at the hem as if she had been walking through the mud for miles. Something about her felt wrong, but I couldn't say why. "Are you okay?" I asked, stepping closer. She didn't answer. The air around me grew colder, a sharp biting chill that raised goosebumps along my arms. Still, I took another step. "Do you need help?" She stopped crying. Her head tilted slightly like she was listening. I should have walked away. I should have turned and left. But I didn't. When she turned to look at me, her face was pale, almost gray. Her eyes were hollow sockets, black and endless. Her mouth stretched open in a silent wail, wider than any human mouth should be able to go. And then the screaming started. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even a sound I could hear. It was inside my head, an unbearable screech that made my vision blur and my knees buckle. I stumbled backward and fell into the dirt. When I looked again, she was gone. I ran all the way back to my car, left the park without thinking twice, but that wasn't the end. That night, I woke up to the sound of water dripping. My first thought was that I had left the faucet on, but when I checked, everything was dry. The sound was coming from the window, and then I heard it, the crying, soft, muffled, as if someone was standing just outside. I peeked through the curtain. She was there, standing at the edge of my yard, her wet dress clinging to her thin frame, her dark hair plastered to her face. She was staring right at me with those hollow, empty eyes. I slammed the curtain shut and backed away. The crying grew louder, filling the house. No matter where I went, I could hear her. In the kitchen. In the hallway. Even when I locked myself in the bathroom, it was there, echoing inside my head. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I did some digging. Found an old newspaper article about a woman who drowned in that lake 50 years ago. They said she had lost her child, wandered into the water one night, and never came out. Locals claimed she still haunted the place, crying for her lost baby, but no one had ever mentioned her leaving the lake. By the third night, I was desperate. I burned sage, hung crosses over the door, said every prayer I could remember. It didn't matter. She kept coming. The crying was louder now, angrier. Sometimes I'd wake up and find puddles of water on the floor, muddy footprints leading from the front door to my bed. Once, I found strands of long black hair on my pillow, wet and cold. Stopped going out, stopped answering my phone. People thought I was crazy. Maybe I was. On the 7th night, I heard knocking at the door. Slow, deliberate. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The door creaked open on its own, and there she was, standing in my living room, water pooling at her bare feet. She raised one hand and pointed at me. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I ran, left everything behind, moved 2 states away. I thought that would be enough, but even now, sometimes late at night, I hear it, the crying, and I know she's still looking for me.